Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air, a spontaneous, unrehearsed discussion of U.S. war making, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, on December 11th, 2018. Our topic tonight is, Will Voting Save Us and Others? Our special guests are James Manrique of, what do you call your organization, James?
The Champaign County Voters Alliance, but today I'm representing myself.
I meant to, okay, good. And Ed Mandel, Republican committeeman, who also represents himself, an election judge.
Well, more to the point, I'm an election judge, yeah, not a committeeman.
Okay. Not a committeeman, election judge, okay. Well, we're preoccupied with politics at home. Our government is killing people in wars around the world. International polls show that the United States, not Russia, China, Iran, or Israel, is by far the most feared government in the world. The wars the U.S. is waging in 8 countries and its war provocations against Russia and China risk a wider, even nuclear war. Although most Americans aren't aware of it, the U.S. government is today making war, killing people, in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. They're doing so principally to control the flow of oil out of the Middle East and North Africa, which the U.S. uses as a weapon against its economic rivals from Germany to China. The ongoing drone assassination program, called the most extreme terrorist campaign of modern times, has killed thousands of people, most of them not the presumed targets, including American citizens and hundreds of children. More than 250,000 American troops are stationed in 1,000 U.S. bases on foreign soil, most of them surrounding Russia and China. The 70,000 members of the U.S. Special Operations Command are active in 3/4 of the countries in the world. Their activities have included kidnapping, the U.S. government calls it rendition, torture, and murder. Since World War II, the United States has killed between 20 and 30 million people in wars in Korea, Vietnam, the Mideast, and elsewhere, designed to maintain the worldwide economic dominance that the U.S. inherited at the end of World War II as the only largely undamaged major country. It's unfortunately the basis of U.S. foreign policy to use war and the threats of war to retard the economic development of Russia and China as competitors to American control of the world economy. From U.S. support for a fascist coup in Ukraine, to U.S. naval provocations in the South China Sea, and huge NATO military exercises in Eastern Europe. The rest of the world recognizes that the U.S. government is what Martin Luther King called it long ago, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. With other peace groups around the world, Aware calls upon President Trump and our government to close all foreign military bases, bring all U.S. troops and weapons home, and provide social supports, including free medical care, education, and universal basic income, for all Americans who've been made poor by generations of our government's wars. Tonight we want to talk about voting with the remark in mind attributed to a variety of people, from Mark Twain to the famous suffragist, whose name escapes me at the moment. Who do I mean?
I don't know. Frederick Douglass? No.
No.
Okay.
If voting could change anything, it would be made illegal. It's an interesting phrase. It crops up every now and then, and no one really has a good citation for its origin, but it's been kicking around in American politics for a couple of generations. Our guests include James Manrique, who wrote the following letter to the News Gazette in September, and I'll preempt you for a minute, James, by reading your note where you set that out, if you want, if you want me to.
Go for it.
Okay. Across the U.S., activists are changing the way we vote. Ranked choice voting has already been implemented in cities such as Cambridge, San Francisco, and Santa Fe. Perhaps most significant is Maine, which converted to ranked choice voting statewide in 2016. So why is it growing in popularity? It's simply better. In our current voting system, When there are 3 or more candidates, it's common to have a candidate win with only the 30 to 40% support among the voters. The benefit of ranked choice voting is that a candidate must receive majority support, at least 50% of the vote, to win. In ranked choice voting, voters rank candidates in order of their favorites, from most preferred to least preferred, much like a top 5 movie list. Once votes are counted, if no candidate has at least 50%, then the lowest candidate is dropped off and votes are recounted according to rank preference. In general, RCV, ranked choice voting, has an array of benefits. It gives voters a more precise vote, allowing them to better express their thoughts on multiple candidates. Additionally, ranked choice voting allows voters to vote their true preferences because they no longer have to worry about wasting their vote on a spoiler third-party candidate. Lastly, it makes campaigns more civil as campaign strategy requires them to court the second choices of other candidates' votes. That's a nice line, James. I wonder if that's the case, but we'll see. So if you believe in better expression at the polls, want less mudslinging in politics, and don't want to waste your vote, you should support ranked choice voting in Illinois. Our guest, James Manrique, wrote that to the News Gazette in September, I guess it was. What would you add to the description of the plan as it stands now, James?
Well, that's absolutely true. I think the biggest benefit of ranked choice voting is the fact that it requires majority support. So you no longer have the occasion where a candidate has votes against them. Over 50% of the population voted against them, and then yet they still win. So that's the biggest benefit. And then, as you were mentioning, it actually not only is it good for the voters, but it's also good for the candidates campaigning. In Santa Fe recently, they had an election with ranked choice voting, and the candidates there actually preferred it because a lot of times when candidates campaign, if they get to a house where somebody is like already decided, which party they're going to vote for, they'll just be like, they'll close the door, they'll say, no, thank you, I've already decided. But in a ranked choice voting situation, it gives the candidate an opportunity to be like, I know that you already have your first choice decided, but would you consider me for choice number 2? Mm-hmm. Like, I agree on this candidate on points, A, B, and C, and here are some other strengths of me. So it's like, it helps build middle ground. And it actually makes it, more beneficial for candidates to campaign. It feels like none of their campaigning is wasted on, like, the wrong party, as it were.
It would also probably encourage voters to know more about the other candidates. I mean, so many people, I think, come to an election, they say, well, I'm for so-and-so who's an incumbent or who's a challenger, and I know that already, and there may be other people, but I'm not really aware of that, and I'm not really quite sure what the differences are between my preferred candidate and the other ones.
Exactly. And then, and also ranked choice voting, it doesn't change anything when there's only 2 candidates. When there's only 2 candidates, everything stays the same. So it only comes in when there's 3 or more. And when there's 3 or more, those are the situations where you get candidates that are more polarized. And the more polarized candidates can be like, oh, well, you can't vote for them, you have to vote for me. And then it gets into this whole, identity politics and, us versus them and the whole tribalism thing. Whereas with ranked choice voting, you can find that middle ground and you can be like, well, you may want that person as number 1, but, I agree with them on X, Y, and Z, and that's why you should, put me as number 2.
Ed, you've worked as an election judge in Champaign
for since 2011. Actually, I've done the primaries and the general elections, and so I've lost count of how many elections I've actually done. But I would say about 7 or 8 elections.
Would you like to see this a system like this introduced around
I'm not sure how viable it is.
Why?
For instance, there are certain elections like I could bring up from the past that I don't. I mean, for instance, with the one easy one is, for instance, in the 1992 presidential election, that involved Ross Perot, George H.W. Bush, and Clinton, and Bill Clinton. I'm sorry, to be precise there. And those were the 3 choices basically. And then other, I'm sure there were. I could look it up, but I'm sure there were other choices in third party candidate in the lower, but those are the 3 major candidates. And I can tell you right now, when I voted for Ross Perot, for about 1 week, he dropped out of the race during that summer. Mm-hmm. And for 1 week, I was in distress because I didn't know who my choice was going to be at that point. Because I had serious issues with both candidates, with both Bush.
But there were actually other candidates in the race too.
Yes, they were.
Those 3, as it were.
Yes, I'm going to be honest with you. Yes, there were. And to be honest with you, I didn't even consider them because unfortunately, that's just the way my mind was operating at that point in my life. And I'm wondering if a lot of people are the same way. And even voting for Ross Perot, I was told constantly, "You're throwing your vote away." And I'm sure I'm sure other people I've encountered that all the time, where I was told by other people, because I was surrounded by people who wanted me to vote for Clinton because they were Democrats, they were union people. You got to vote for Clinton.
And that's the great thing about ranked choice voting is that no vote is thrown away. No matter who your candidate, no matter how you choose for number one, your vote will still be tallied in the final vote tally. So it totally eliminates the whole spoiler situation. And the other good thing too is that if you're in a situation where you only like one of the three candidates, you don't have to fill out the other two. You can still just vote for that as number one, and then just not fill in the other two.
I'll just say that was my situation back then. That literally I had no second choice. And so it's kind of funny that in retrospect, I mean, I've heard some discussion with the recent passing of George H.W. Bush that all of the Perot votes were going to vote were claimed by Bush. And I can tell you right now, as a person, that Bush was not my second choice. I really was gut wrenching for that 1 week that I was actually seriously thinking about voting for Clinton. Fortunately, Perot jumped back in the race, and you might consider that you only got 19% of the vote. I agree, but he was my choice, and I was sincerely voting. And I'm actually, in retrospect, I'm actually glad I voted for him. Because in my mind, that was one of the most important votes that I made in my entire life up to that point. Because I really felt motivated at that time. Without going into too much detail of that particular period of time in my life, there was a big rally in New Jersey. I was living in the New York area, and I was really motivated to vote for him. And also, as you could see, I rejected the Clintons back in '92. So when they say that, what persuaded me to reject, the Clintons? Well, it was 25 years in the making. So it wasn't a new prize, something new or reason, or wasn't a Russian collusion. It was something that happened spontaneously.
Well, I agree with that. I think a lot of people want to vote for a candidate. They feel very strongly about the candidate that they choose,
Yes.
and a lot of times they feel pressured, like Ed said, from their friends that you can't vote for that candidate because they're third party. They're never going to win.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so that makes it really hard for voters. They're like, am I doing the right thing? I like this candidate, but I feel like the candidate might not have any chance. Ranked choice voting helps instill the voter confidence in that, because then you know that your vote's never going to get wasted in that situation. And I mean, you could still make the choice of like, I don't like any of the candidates, I'm not going to vote for them. But if you're somebody that's on the fence or something like that, with the ranked choice voting, it gives you the power to be like, no, my vote's not going to be wasted. I can vote my conscience. I can be proud about the person that I'm voting for, and I can know that it's not just being cast into the wind. Or
James, here's this thing now. Now, for instance, rather than going back way back in time, let's go back to the 2016 election. Again, we're not going into the issues of the election itself.
Exactly.
We did actually discuss the candidates themselves. I can tell you right now, a lot of people, when they voted for Trump, that was it. I mean, there was no backup. I mean, and I have a feeling that, for instance, Hillary Clinton, in her book "What Happened," she almost makes the assumption that people who voted for Jill Stein for the Green Party, their second choice would have been her.
Yeah.
And Carl, I know you voted for Jill Stein.
That's true.
Would you say that Hillary Clinton was your second choice?
No.
And I'm just guessing that. I mean, I don't that assumption that the Democrat Party and the Green Party are natural. That voter would have been good in that direction. I don't agree with that assumption. I think she may. But I want to get into the issues of that were involved here. But the assumption that the second choice, what would have been the second choice, and the assumption also when I voted for Trump that the Libertarian Party was my second choice, and it wasn't.
Which you could have done because there was a Libertarian candidate.
Right. Yeah, right. Johnson.
Well, the nice thing about the 2016 election is that, some people really liked Trump and liked what he was supporting, but with the whole Republican side, I think there was many of the primary elections where Trump only had like 30% of the vote.
Oh, yeah.
And so ranked choice voting in that situation could have prevented Trump from even becoming the candidate on the ticket.
Actually, you are correct. That because there were 16 or 17 candidates that were running, and and that would have really changed the primary rather than the general election.
Exactly, and it would have instead of fracturing the vote, a million different ways, all the people that just were against Trump, they could have had Trump as their last choice on the ranked choice voting, and then ranked every other candidate above him.
It would have changed. It would have changed the dynamics of the primaries completely.
And it could have also helped Bernie Sanders too, because was it Kasich or something?
No,
the third person.
You're mixing up the Republicans with the Bernie Sanders was on the Democrat side.
Right, but on the Democrat side, there was a third candidate with Bernie and Clinton, and with the initial primaries, that third candidate did split the vote.
I know who you're referring to. Yes.
I don't think it's Kasich. I'm thinking
that's
a
right.
reporter. He was so memorable, we forgot.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think it was from.
What's his name from
Maryland.
Ohio? Was it?
From Maryland. I remember it was.
Maryland. Oh, I know. Yes, of course.
Well, I'll look it up while you're talking.
He was a quality candidate for sure.
We'll put our research staff on it.
But yeah, ranked choice voting would have definitely helped the 2016 election, and I mean, even with the Jill Stein candidates, you may not have voted for Clinton down the list, but at least you could have had more confidence that your vote wasn't just totally burned by that.
Now, the Democrats in their primaries could institute ranked choice voting by themselves, so to speak. That wouldn't take a state law or statute in order to do that, right?
It might take a state law potentially, but
I see. Yeah.
But that's the interesting thing about elections is that elections are really dependent on state and county and even city, and it's so decentralized that there are a lot of different election codes and election laws.
The person you were looking for is Martin O'Malley.
Martin O'Malley, exactly.
Martin O'Malley. Yes. He probably would have benefited from a lot of people that were not sure about Bernie Sanders or Hillary, and it's possible he would have gotten more recognition. Let's say.
You're quite right about that. I think.
Yes.
James, tell me how it's worked out in those states that actually have ranked choice voting in order. What's it done to the vote? Is there?
I believe it was Maine recently that elected a state representative or a Congress member through ranked choice voting, and it actually flipped that vote. The Republican got the plurality of the vote. He got the most of the three or four candidates in the bunch. But once they dropped off the third or fourth candidate from that list, those people had the Democrat as their second choice, and the Democrat actually won that election because of the ranked choice voting system.
And this was for a state senator, you think? In Maine?
I believe it was a state representative in Maine. I forget if it was the member of Congress or which, but there was an election in Maine where it was one of the first ones in Maine, and it actually the ranked choice voting thing flipped that election. For better or worse.
Maine only has one representative in Congress, do they, or do they have two?
Probably only one, because that one's dependent on population size.
Exactly. Right.
But another recent election was Santa Fe, New Mexico. They have ranked choice voting, and there was recently a video on YouTube where they were talking with all the different election officials and candidates in that election. And pretty much across the board, the candidates and the officials liked it better than the current system because of, like I said, it really builds, instead of the campaigns being like very bitterly opposed to each other, it encourages a lot more coalition building, or a lot more, finding the middle ground, speaking to the center instead of speaking to the, just the edges of the, the divisiveness, as it were.
Well, tell me how you think it would have affected the recent election in Champaign-Urbana.
A lot of ways,
Really?
Especially the primary for sure, because the primary was massive. The primary had 4 or 5 candidates for Congress. Well, and that's on the state level. So, I mean, you could even look further down on the city level. In Urbana, there's been a couple different mayor elections that have had more than 2 people running. And there's actually been a couple of city council elections that have had more than 2 people running, especially in Ward 7, from what I understand. There was Darrell Cruz ran there once. And, so yeah, it could potentially change that. I mean, unfortunately, ranked choice voting doesn't change as much on the local level, just because there's not as many contested spots running.
Right.
But there are occasions where there are more than 2 people running for mayor. And then that's the other nice thing with ranked choice voting is that it can reduce costs by eliminating the primary election. So sometimes with these municipal elections, if there's too many candidates running, they'll hold a primary, and then they'll cut down some candidates, and they'll hold a second election. With ranked choice voting, you can combine that all into one election and not have to double up the costs. So it can reduce costs.
So James, I don't know if this would make it confusing, but sometimes when I look at the choices, I mean, I'll admit that during the primaries, it probably with this ranked choice voting would have had some benefit there, because you did have at least on the Republican side, you had a lot of choices there. My goodness, but sometimes when I look at the choices, I don't consider them. Like maybe I'm like 90% towards this for this guy and like 60%. So it's like a steep drop off there.
It can happen.
And in ranked voting, I don't know if it sort of captures that essence there. That my second choice is nowhere near as good as my first or second choice or third choice, whatever it is. And I don't know if it makes any sense.
I mean, I think that does make sense, and I think that kind of goes to just a flaw of politics in general is that that there's no perfect politician, and like with every politician, there's going to be things that you disagree with them on, and it's a lot of times it's finding the politician that you disagree with least.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, again, with ranked choice voting, you don't have to fill out the whole thing. So if you really just dispose the other candidates or just don't like them, you don't have to fill out the bottom part. You can just put your top two or whatever it may be.
Right.
But it just tries to foster, more talking to the middle and just trying to find that common ground. Because, like you said, there's a lot that you can disagree with politicians, but with ranked choice voting, it fosters trying to find that middle ground and trying to find those things that you do agree on with certain politicians.
I could see that ranked choice voting would work if there was an incredible. For instance, I think in the upcoming Democrat primary, they're expecting was it 20 or 20 to 25 or the candidates are 40. I don't know how many probably in Democrat primary, but they're expecting a lot of candidates, and that probably ranked voting would probably help out quite a bit over there. I don't know. And although I have my own cynical view of what's probably going to happen there, because.
I mean, coming up here in Chicago, they're about to have that mayor election, and that mayor election has over 10 candidates, or maybe even close to 20. Like it's literally insane. So you may have a situation where the candidate might possibly win with 15% of the vote, or like something really minuscule. And I mean, is that really representative of what the people want in that area?
You're right.
That's very interesting. Is there any way that ranked choice voting could be instituted for the Chicago mayoral election, or would it take too long and it would be a matter of state law?
It would probably take too long for that specific election because that's coming up so quickly. But that, again, goes back to the nice thing about election laws is election laws get very local. Sometimes there are hurdles on the state level. Sometimes there are like state limitations of how the elections ran. But a lot of times it's up to the county or the city how they want to run their own election.
So the Chicago City Council could establish ranked choice voting for the mayoral election.
Yep. I'm not 100% sure on the Illinois election law, but as long as there's nothing in the Illinois election law that prevents that, they should be able to do that. So.
I wonder if ranked choice voting should be initiated rather than for every single election, but for elections where there are a lot of candidates. And so it would help pare down the system fairly rather than the way it has been done in the past, where, for instance, someone like, to go back in time here, Ron Paul was completely ignored, eliminated, and because he wasn't given equal publicity by the news media, and so he was eliminated because he wasn't given exposure, rather than by the voters. So it's kind of a strange event there, actually.
Well, I think that's exactly why the establishment doesn't like ranked choice voting, because it gives candidates like him easier platform to say, a vote for me is not wasted. So.
Yeah.
And then, that continues to go back to, in a situation where there's only two candidates, nothing changes under ranked choice voting. Everything still stays the same. So.
Right.
It does bring up the interesting question, though, the necessity for other publicity, for other candidates. I mean, we have an election now. There's a Republican candidate, a Democratic candidate, and there may be some others, but nobody hears about them because, of course, those candidates don't have the money to buy television time or ads in the newspapers and so forth.
That happens all the time, actually.
And it seems to me that what ranked choice voting would encourage a reorganization of the publicity matter. We normally hear that in terms of get money out of politics, where that money is used almost entirely to buy ads for publicity.
Yeah.
I had a brief personal experience with this probably before both of you were born. It was a good while ago.
Okay.
I ran for Congress in this district, actually under the old arrangements of the old division of the state into districts. It wasn't the 13th in those days; it was the 15th. But
You ran as a Green Party candidate.
Beg pardon?
You ran as a Green. Oh,
yes, I ran as a member of the Green Party.
Yeah, right.
That was in 2002 when
Right.
redistricting had taken place, and the situation was such that we would be able to establish a candidacy on the basis of the new district. It was an interesting campaign. I learned a lot. I'm not sure anybody else did, but certainly the people who worked with me on that
Campaign.
when by anybody else, I mean the voters, because certainly the people who worked on it learned a great deal about how this works.
Right.
And one of the things that we discovered, I thought, was that the publicity issue was vital, and then we asked people to contribute to the campaign. We were simply asking them to give us money to buy advertising time. It seems to me that the best thing we could do, instead of getting money out of politics, is make sure that radio and television these days, and social media probably as well as newspapers and whatnot, are required to provide time for all legitimate candidates. You could do it on the basis of a requirement that if a television station, say, sells time to one candidate in a race, it must give an equivalent amount of time to the other candidates in the race. Now, televisions don't have to sell publicity, but if they do, and they usually want to because, well, it makes them money, the requirement that other candidates be given an equivalent amount of time would be a way around this. Ranked choice voting would seem to me to encourage a system like that, because instead of going into an election saying, well, I know I want to vote for the Republican, I don't know who else is running, people would have at least some interest in finding out who else was running, and we would have a system that would give them the information about the other people who are running. That would seem to me to be a step in the right direction, not a complete reform by any means, but a way in which we could encourage the understanding of what the election actually means before the fact.
I wonder if I could go into a discussion of the system we have here in Champaign, because I've heard repeatedly that somehow there was the interference with the election by the Russians, whatever it is, and I can tell you right now that, I mean, as an election judge, I can tell you right now, here in Champaign, that was impossible, and because we have such a backup. One of the I think we have here in Champaign County, we actually have a paper ballot, and also you have to sign in, and so literally we have so many backups here in Champaign that validates your vote. I believe in other places in the country there's a touch screen and there's no validation for the numbers.
Right.
And if you have no paper ballot or no validation for it, then it's almost like a Wizard of Oz. There's the numbers. And so that's why I'm really against voting from home or something like that. It may be easier, but there's no way of validating the numbers themselves. I mean,
the voting from
That's
home,
an
you can
interesting
do
point.
Mail-in ballots.
mail-in ballots, yes. Okay, I agree with you there. And I want to mention something about mail-in ballots, because, I mean, for instance, here in Champaign, I had some experiences with people who came in to vote, and they said, well, I want to vote here, vote on election day. And he said, well, here's my mail-in ballot. And we took it from them, and we spoiled that so they could vote on the day on the day of the things.
Oh,
I wrote the word spoiled.
You didn't
on
just file the ballot that they
well,
brought in.
we took that ballot away from them, and we spoiled it, and then we had them vote on the day of the election. Okay. And also, the thing is, there was one person came to the was a military person who came to the vote. He didn't bring his mail-in ballot with him, and so we were forced to give him a provisional ballot.
Oh, I see.
And so he voted that day, but he had 24 hours to bring in that mail-in ballot so we could spoil it to make sure he didn't vote twice.
Wow. So you had to have him bring in that ballot, and then you moved his provisional ballot
in order to validate his provisional ballot. So it makes logical sense, but that was the reason why we did that. So we put his ballot inside of a separate envelope rather than with the other votes. So I don't know what this. I heard the situation down in Florida. They had a problem with provisional ballots where people voting after the election or something. And that's not happening. You vote on election day or before, and it's just a matter of figuring out exactly is provisional, and then you have 24 hours to validate it, or something like that. So I don't know what they did down in Florida where they were literally it was a quandary. I don't know.
Thank you, Ed. You have been watching Aware on the Air. Our usual remit is to discuss American war making. We're talking about the decision-making process that leads to the American government being feared around the world as a maker of war. That decision-making process of voting has a variety of forms, and my guests, James Manrique and Ed Mandel, have been discussing ranked choice voting, a way in which all the candidates for a given office can be put in your order of preference when you vote. It seems to me that it does have a lot of interesting possibility and a worthwhile undertaking in general. Gentlemen, can we turn attention perhaps to this recent election in Champaign-Urbana?
We could.
I know you both have views about that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
James, you want to start?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the election was very interesting for a variety of different ways. I mean, we were mentioning earlier money in politics. I think it came out recently that over $12 million was spent in the 13th congressional
That's
district.
astonishing, isn't it?
Just for the congressional race.
Yeah.
That's not talking about
Yeah.
the money that Pritzker spent or all that other stuff. And I mean, and that, I mean, speaking of voting, that was decided with less than 3,000 votes. I think it was just over 2,000.
As an election judge, I can tell you specifically that on election day, I noticed that there were a piece of paper being handed to the candidates, to the voters outside in the parking lot, which is illegal because they were within they were coming into the voting area with these pieces of paper. And they were telling us these pieces of paper were being handed to them out in the parking lot, telling them to vote straight Democrat, whatever it is, and the idea
I've
is
seen those people.
And you're not supposed to hand it out within a certain on election day within a certain distance from the election, and that's the whole point.
If it's partisan material, the one thing that I was able to do on election day was with the votechampaign.org, we had nonpartisan material that we were able to hand out to line members, but that was different than with the people that you'd seen. There was a team of Democrats in town that were doing exactly what you mentioned.
The whole point of, for instance, you have to have I think it's 100 feet. We given a string, and then you have to put your election the things on election day out in a distance from the elections in the polling area. And the idea is, I mean, you're supposed to. In fact, we had a problem in our polling area, and polling thing I was involved with, where there were pictures on the wall we had to have taken down because some of the candidates. So some of the candidates were on the wall there. We had to, and we had to take. And then the thing is, they were very nice about it. They took the pictures down of the different candidates that were running for it in that election that I was conducting this past November.
Yeah, this local election had a lot of controversy in it for different reasons. I mean, gosh, I don't even know where to start, really.
Go ahead.
Pick one, and we'll see where it takes us.
I found the partisanness of the election very interesting. That I always feel that local elections should be a lot more about the issues and a lot less about Democrat versus Republican, elephant versus donkey, red versus blue. But this local election was very much that. It was very much about, we can't vote for Republicans, they're the party of Trump. You can't do
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
You have to vote for us. We're the Democrats. We're the good guys. You have to trust us. And it was very little about actual issues.
Spillover from the national campaign, do you think? I mean, as you suggest, you got to vote for Republicans locally because nationally they're running this strange guy that you can't vote for.
There was some of that, but it was manufactured that way. Like the candidates specifically chose that tactic over like running issue based. So I mean, part of it, is a lot of people don't like Trump, so they want to vote against him. But the candidates specifically fed into that. They specifically made it very much us versus them. This is an election where those scary Republicans are trying to take your rights away, and we have to stop it. And it was very little about actual local issues. And I mean, like the biggest, I guess the elephant in the room is the county clerk race, because that was the big local election in town that was county-wide, was the county clerk race. And that whole race was very partisan. On the Democrat side, it was very much, us versus them, and it wasn't a lot about local election issues, and it was a lot more just about identity politics and that whole sort of thing.
What were the real issues in the county clerk? Did it make a difference which candidate was elected county clerk in terms of how that office would perform and what they might do?
Potentially, yeah, because on one side you had somebody that had been in the office, running the office for like the past 4 or 6 years. Second in command, knows the office very well, knows the ins and outs of the office. And then on the other
side,
Matt Grandoni.
Matt Grandoni he was a trainer. Gordy Holton was the actual clerk.
Right, but Matt Grandoni was essentially second in command.
He trained me, he trained me to be a clerk.
And so he knew all the ins and outs of the election. He'd helped run elections before, so you have one person that has like 4 or 5 years of experience, and then another person that's never done any of that. I don't think Aaron's ever been an election judge or anything close to that.
Actually, to be fair, also it was more than just Matt Grandoni. It was also
John Rector.
Rose. I mean, no, not John Rector.
Okay.
A woman named Rose is also involved behind the scenes with training, and apparently she has made a decision to disconnect herself from the office. But the idea is there are I mean, you're talking about the candidate specifically. Yeah, Matt Grandoni was the candidate, and I think John Rector was the other candidate.
And his Democratic opponent was someone we all know personally, Aaron Ammons. And his campaign did stress the fact that he was a Democrat, and that this was an important part of the operation.
Yep. In fact, he named it. He named his campaign early on after the Alabama church bombing. To emphasize, the scare tactics of, it's a life or death thing. These, people are trying to suppress our vote, and we have to fight this voter suppression. And
well, I can tell you right now, as an election judge, we have here in Champaign one of the best systems in the entire country. I don't know if I mentioned that to emphasize that before. The fact that we have a paper ballot to validate the numbers. And so we have one of the best systems. I don't understand the concept of that we're suppressing it. I think one of the issues that Aaron mentioned was the fact there were long lines at the campus, on campus, and I don't know what he thinks of as a solution to that problem. One of the solutions that already exists is that all the students could have voted early. And they voted early, then there wouldn't be those long lines. They wouldn't have to wait at all. They had plenty of time to vote.
And that goes back into the whole us versus them, because with the campus thing and the voter suppression, they really didn't want to give Gordy Holton any sort of credit in the slightest bit on the days before that where there wasn't lines or anything like that. And they were very quick to jump and call it immediately. It is a form of voter suppression. It's guaranteed voter suppression. Even if he didn't mean to cause the long lines, just the fact that the long lines happened is a form of voter suppression. And it was very interesting to see people so militantly against Gordy Holton in that respect. And I disagree with Gordy Holton on several points. Yeah. But you have to give credit where credit's due, or otherwise you kind of come off looking as.
See, I can tell you apparently right before I became involved as an election judge, they used to have those large binders, and you had to sign your name in these large binders. And eventually, they replaced it with the laptops, which really made a major difference. It really speeded up the process of voting. And in the very beginning, when they introduced the laptops, we did have a problem. I was actually there right from the first year of the laptops, where the numbers were thrown off by the provisional ballots. It's hard to describe this unless you were actually there. But at the end of the day, our numbers were off because the laptops couldn't factor in the provisional ballots, and then we were constantly being told the voter must sign on this line, and the numbers were off, and they would go off and off. But eventually, that problem was solved. So that isn't voter suppression. That was just a new system that was being introduced, and there were problems with it. And I can tell you right now, those problems were fixed.
Yep.
And right now, I do believe that, I don't know about voter suppression. I don't see it at all. I think the system we have right now is one of the best in the entire country, because there's a paper ballot that validates the vote on it, and we have multiple people signing their names on a certain line. And we have to add up those numbers constantly.
And I think the Democrats were very quick to call any mistake or any error or any slight malfunction. They're very quick to call that voter suppression. If there's any slight error, even if it's just human error, that is voter suppression. And that goes into if Gordy Holton was really wanting to suppress the vote, he had a lot of options at his disposal. Like, for instance, I think he's only required to have early voting for 4 days. He had early voting for like over a week. So I mean,
my goodness, it was more than a week.
Well, at Brookings there was a very long time, but for like the early voting spots, he's only by law required to do 4. And that goes back to local election officials have a lot of say in how the elections get ran. And so the Democrats were again and again and again saying Gordy Holton is a voter suppressor. He hates student voters. He's doing everything in his power to, nobody, if somebody was trying to suppress the vote, they couldn't do a better job than what Gordy's doing now. And that is just patently false for a variety of reasons. So it's very, I don't know, it's interesting to see them tout all these things while at the same time, knowing another reality.
The only problem that I believe that I'm not an expert at this, but I think that one of the problems that we were experiencing, or they were experiencing, was the idea of students defining exactly where they lived, where they lived at where they came from, or where they lived on campus, so I don't that is a problem. Trying to define exactly where you live and where you should vote, and obviously to prevent students from voting multiple times.
Well, and that address thing was actually part of the reason why there was such long lines on the Monday before the election, was because specifically at that campus location, the majority of the people there were updating their registration, they were updating their address, they were doing that, and that updating process takes longer than just casting a ballot.
Right.
So when you have a whole bunch of people doing that, you have a lot more room for delays.
I will tell you, as an election judge, it does slow things. It does slow things down to have to go through the process of that. Yes, it does. But the thing is, again, they had the opportunity to vote early, so they could have done this process earlier than election day or the day before. Like they had plenty of time to update their voting in their address. I believe there was another problem also. I noticed. People who are homeless, and I believe people who are homeless, they use a certain general location as their address.
They can use like service locations, like anywhere that they get like services from. They can use that a lot of times. And I didn't hear the news piece, but I heard that there was some manufactured crisis about the homeless voting.
Right.
That there was somebody that brought a homeless person to a voting location, tried to get them to vote, and the election judges tried to help them in voting, but the person that brought them there didn't want to certify the address of the person or didn't want to help that person get the paperwork that they needed. And then they apparently used that as yet another example of voter suppression in Champaign.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sick of that.
It just reminds me of a random thought that I've had for a long time. It seems to me that it really would be quite worthwhile if we had something in the order of a national identity card or a national identity certification for everyone, so that basically that you're issued at birth, so that you can use that identification in order to vote.
So unfortunately, by omission, we use the driver's license as and
Yeah, exactly. That's what.
that is used generally
Which is
as the
crazy.
car. And unfortunately, most people don't drive. A lot of people,
And that's just going to
a
get.
lot of people don't drive.
That's just going to get more the case as self-driving cars become more available.
Well, that's another story.
It's, the fact you're absolutely right. The fact that we've gone to the equivalent of a national identity card with local driver's license is just crazy.
Well, Carl, I think you also realize that the Social Security number was never meant to be your
Exactly.
identity card, and
That's
it
right.
just became.
But it could be. I mean,
But-
if we
well,
did it.
unfortunately,
seriously.
it shouldn't be because your number contains very personal information that I'm sure. So most people want to keep it secret. So the idea that it would become, because you have personal data.
I mean, I definitely agree that voter registration should be a thing of the past. Like,
Exactly.
you should be, like, the moment that you're allowed to vote, it should just be
Precisely.
you can vote. And, I mean, there are
Precisely.
people that disagree with, big government databases of everybody's
It's just-
names. But
yeah.
then again, the world that we live in, it's already going to be the case. So you
Exactly.
kinda, go with the flow in that case. And Illinois is working on universal voter registration, but unfortunately, there's some hurdles in that, and they're trying to do an Illinois ID, this real ID.
This I don't know about. Who's behind that, and how are they coming?
It was a bipartisan thing. It got passed. The bill itself got a little bit watered down right before it got passed, so unfortunately, it's not as automatic as it could be. But and it's already they're already rolling out parts of the provisions, but it all has to focus around that real ID, which is supposed to overlap the driver's license or state ID. It's supposed to be the super ID for Illinois.
So what would happen if someone who moved here from Massachusetts, to take a state at random, arrives in Illinois, and when he crosses the border, he receives his Illinois identification?
He can sign up for it, yeah. He won't receive it automatically. You'll have to
Right.
fill out some forms, and you have to provide either a birth certificate or some sort of documentation showing that you are a citizen and that.
Do you have to be a resident? Do you have to? I mean, back to the student issue. Do you have to be I mean, how do I?
That's a good question. Well,
Yeah,
so with
well-
the real ID, I think it moves with you. So part of the idea is that once you have this real ID, anytime that you interact with the government, either at the DMV
Sure.
or potentially through the universities maybe, or anytime that you sign up for government services,
Right.
then it would update your address automatically with whatever your most new one is.
And the reasonable thing would be to make it nationwide. I mean, for all U.S. citizens.
Yeah, I mean,
And,
that would take a lot of pushing, and like I said, some people disagree with government ID in that sort of case, but I mean, definitely we should be doing more to eliminate the hurdles of voter registration.
Exactly. Exactly.
Although, I mean, I wanted to mention this also, and I don't know if both of you would disagree with this, but when as an election judge, when it first came out, I was told that we needed to register, and this happened with the last few election cycles, that the people were registering to vote on the day of election. I actually disagreed with that. If you really are motivated to want to vote in an election, you should register to vote a long time in advance of it. If it really was a concern of yours to do that, you shouldn't wait to the last minute to an election day to actually register to vote and suddenly vote. I mean, this is just my take on
I
the
agree,
issue.
but
You remind me of my fourth grade teacher. Ed.
I'm sorry.
If you want lunch, you really should have brought in your money yesterday.
Oh my!
I mean, we live in a last-minute society, unfortunately, doing everything at the last minute.
I think the identification thing is, the objections to that aren't really very serious, and particularly when we look at the very real issues that have occurred in a number of states in this past election that would be solved by a system that would allow every American citizen to cast a vote in every election for which they're eligible.
Well, there is an issue in California where I think a lot of illegal aliens were issued driver's licenses.
Well, when the driver's license takes the place of the national identity card, then that's a problem.
But I'm saying suddenly they became citizens who could vote simply because they became drivers.
And that's why they're trying to move away from the driver's
Yeah,
license as being the identifier for voting. That's why they're trying to shift to that real ID.
Right.
And I think, Carl, you were mentioning the national government ID. That would solve one of the problems that Aaron was complaining about in his campaign. Was there's this whole cross-check system, and Eric to try to those systems are in place to try to make sure that when one person moves from one state to another, that their voter records are updated and that they don't have a voter record in both states. If we had a national government ID like that, that would eliminate the whole need for both of these systems.
And could the national government ID be tied to something like a retinal scan, so that you don't? It's not. You don't have to carry the card around, so to speak. That you're born in America as a citizen, and well, I know birthright and other issues, but still, you're born in America as a citizen. You're issued a national ID that's tied to
Biometric data.
There, that's the phrase I wanted.
Well,
It's tied to biometric data, and you can then use it wherever you want. Now, there's still problems there. I mean, if I live in Massachusetts and decide to go to Illinois to vote, there still may be an issue there about who can vote in Illinois and who can't. But still in all, it would wipe away a lot of these other issues, it seems to me. And there's a second.
That's with people who are blind, by the way. Who get?
Well,
I'm sorry, just kidding.
There's a kicker here too, because it seems to me that we are going to have to get more serious fairly soon about a guaranteed annual income, and how do we a universal basic income, if you prefer. Guaranteed annual income was Richard Nixon's way to describe it. If you
Man of many great ideas.
when he tried to do it, exactly, and the Democrats stopped him. But the system of identification that would allow you to draw the income that is due to you as an American citizen needs to be fairly sound. It has to be a good system, and that means what you rightly call biometric data, I should think.
I mean, it's getting cheaper and cheaper to do DNA tests. They speculate that sometime in the future DNA tests may be cheap enough that you could do them at will, and that could be a thing, just having a DNA marker or something. But
That's interesting. You have to give blood to vote? No.
In theory, it could be saliva or anything that gives off DNA.
You have to spit.
Yeah.
You have to spit in order to vote. That makes a good deal of sense.
Well, I mean,
On
in order to
several
get that
levels.
card or to verify, that your card.
I'm here to vote.
But
Yeah, sure. We shorten the process of your. I vote for this guy. Sure.
I like that. I think it would be very worthwhile,
you do that on the way into the polls already.
you
So
go.
I mean,
There you go.
Your opinion is already expressed and registered before you cross the threshold. There is another aspect of voting that came to me from my very limited experience of running for Congress, and that is the notion that voting for individual candidates perhaps has to give way. I was thinking about that, particularly in relationship to running for Congress. And of course, when you run for Congress, in I think every state in the union, you run in a congressional district, and in that congressional district, your vote depends upon the people who live within that district.
Right.
Now, it seemed to me, coming out of that election, that it would have been far better to have the 20 Illinois representatives to the U.S. Congress be elected from lists. People wouldn't vote for individuals, but they would vote for the Libertarian list, the Democratic list, the Republican list, what have you. And then those representatives sent to Congress from Illinois would be apportioned according to that vote.
So-
that is, if the
so these-
Democrats got 50% of the state votes for Congress, they get 50% of the delegates.
So, Carl, literally these local elections become like statewide elections? In a way?
No, I'm talking now about Congress. I'm talking about the federal.
like the House of Representatives,
The House of
the Senate,
Representatives,
or well,
exactly.
not necessarily the U.S.
To get away
Senate,
from the gerrymandering problems. I mean, the gerrymandering problems are absolutely ridiculous.
and that would be like a parliamentary sort of system, right, or something close to that, where you vote based on party, and then however many votes or the percentage of votes that party
Exactly.
gets, then that party can fill out.
That's
more
right.
Candidates.
And the parties would not be, shall I say, predetermined. Any group of people who got together and got enough people, and probably a deposit of some sort. I mean, in that sense, like the
I
parliamentary
will say that
system.
the gerrymandering system we have right now, some of the districts look absolutely insane. I mean,
exactly.
they go down one of them at least goes down a highway, and they go all over the
I
place.
mean, our district goes from here all the way to Taylorville,
And of
and
course-
it covers all sorts of weird things.
And the reasons for that have been in many cases racist. The idea gerrymandering in Virginia, where I grew up, was carefully designed to make sure that black communities remained in their limited area and wouldn't affect the vote in the wider white area.
Yeah, it's a
was
dual
perfectly conscious.
It's a really dual-edged sword too, because on one hand you do want to give those minority communities a voice in the process,
very good point.
and you don't want to spread them out so that their voice can never rise above the majority. You don't
Excellent
want that.
point.
But then you get a situation where if you pigeonhole them all into one space,
Right.
then are they really having as wide of effect as they could?
And voting by lists, I mean, the vote that you call parliamentary here, does get around that. I like the idea that if the Greens had got 10%, 20% of the vote in Illinois when I ran, it would have gotten 2 representatives in Congress. The party would have gotten 2 representatives in Congress.
Whitney.
And I don't mind getting away from the current system in order to ensure representation for everybody who votes for different parties. The demonstrations of gerrymandering and how it works are quite vivid. People understand that pretty significantly. But the fact of the matter is that the congressional districts across the country are gerrymandered, on a lot of issues, not just race, rural, urban, wealthy and poor, various and sundry other ways, and we get the result is an unrepresentative Congress. You started off this evening, James, talking about unrepresentative elections, and it seems to me that's one way to get around them.
So I'll just voice the opinion that I don't know if ranked voting, that your choice ranked voting would work in every single election. But I think it would work in elections, for example, like the Republican primary, where there were a lot of candidates,
Right.
or there were a lot of. But when it gets down to 4 or 5, I don't think it would work.
It's interesting conjunction here. How about ranked choice voting and voting by lists? In other words, when I go in to vote for Congress, I'm presented with a Republican list, a Democratic list, a Libertarian list, a Green list, and so forth. And there may be half a dozen, maybe even a dozen different lists of candidates. I can choose those lists and rank choose those lists too, eh?
Yeah.
So my first choice would be the Republicans, my second would be the Libertarians, my third would be the Greens, and only then would be the Democrats.
Well, and like you
not
said,
saying that
I
would
think
be
that
the
might
case,
be
but
better for
what would happen?
members of Congress or something like that. It might be better than for local offices. So, one last radical idea on local elections would be: what if we removed party from the ballot entirely? Because there's been a lot of complaints in local elections of people voting for candidates that they have no idea about. People voting just straight ticket, voting straight Democrat, straight Republican.
Yeah.
If we remove the party labels, then they wouldn't be able to just vote straight
Well,
Democrat.
I think
or
what would
straight
happen
Republican.
is then literally what would take over is the marketing. The name,
Yep.
the marketing would be all over the place, and so people would throw their names out there, and it would become almost.
They're already doing it.
Well, I think it would become even more abusive if. So I think removing party distinction, well, it would force the person voting, the voter, to be more knowledgeable of who they're voting for.
I mean, that would be the goal, is
Yes.
to make them no longer vote straight ticket, and they would have to be voting based on.
But also, people would end up voting for the candidate, the names they recognize.
They
But then
already
surely
do.
my ad would be, vote for me for this office. By the way, I'm a Green. That wouldn't be on the ballot, but
Yeah.
that would be what my ads would say. Right?
Anyway, there it is.
You have been watching Aware on the Air. I have completely lost track of the time. What do we have left? Okay, good. Time for one final comment from each of you.
I don't know. What's my final comment?
First of all, let me say how much I appreciate you all talking about this issue. It's been a vigorous discussion, and in the wake of the recent election, it's very necessary.
Definitely, yeah. Local elections, they can change a lot of things, and it's a lot easier to influence local elections than it is to influence national elections. So I mean, if anybody's still watching this program, I would definitely encourage them to focus on local elections. There's so much drama going on in the national scene, but we can't change that. We can change what happens locally. And proof positive is this last election that we just had. The local political parties that be, they absolutely changed the scene in this town. This last election was historic. They got an unbelievable number of student voters out that was literally unprecedented.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One of the precincts in that on campus, one of my friends did the campaigning around there. They were able to get more ballots cast in that precinct than they've ever cast before in that precinct.
Yep.
Even compared to presidential elections, there were more ballots in this last election.
That's what I heard, yeah.
It is possible to influence local elections, and that is where people should put their efforts.
I think it overwhelmed. I think it literally overwhelmed the people who've been voting. Whatever. I won't go yay or nay.
Oh, yeah.
I exactly define this, but yeah.
I mean, the point being is that it's possible to influence
Yes.
local elections, and that's where people should put their efforts towards
Yes.
the local scene.
You've been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, recorded in the studios of Urbana Public Television on December 11th in the anti-penultimate week of 2018. Another week in which the world can see that the most extensive global terrorism is U.S. worldwide war-making, for which its principal criminal associates these days are the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Israel. The U.S. aids the Saudis in their near-genocidal war in Yemen and the Israelis in their racist oppression of the Palestinian people. The Israeli government has murdered protesters at the fence with Gaza, the world's largest open-air prison camp. The U.S. supports that, primarily because Israel is a U.S. stationary aircraft carrier for the control of Mideast energy, gas, and oil, a weapon the U.S. uses against its economic rivals from Germany to China. On this show, we concentrate on the shamefully underreported news of U.S. war-making. Our show is produced and directed by Jason Liggett and Crofton Coleman, thanks to whom also this program and others like it will be available on YouTube and archive.org. Research is provided by the indefatigable Dr. No, J.B. Nicholson, whose notes and links can be found on the Facebook page for Aware on the Air. My thanks to my guests tonight, James Manrique and Ed Mandel, and we'll have them both back soon, I hope. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about but Americans don't. Assange, Manning, Snowden, and others who are truth-tellers persecuted by the U.S. government, and particularly our liberal Democrat Senator Durbin, a shill for the Russiagate propaganda and the attacks on WikiLeaks. This is Carl Estabrook for the members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late broadcaster Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.